Hi, welcome to Storytime with Dave Booker. It is time to begin. So we're going to go to chapter 17 today of The Legend of Creation by Steve Wolf. And I'm going to take a drink before we begin because my throat's been dry. It is freezing outside today. I hope you're warm where you are. I'm going to turn down the light a little bit. Hold on. Oh, that glare off my bald head is kind of distracting. All right, chapter 17, Turning the Tide. Reg was waiting under the hatch that led to the vertical conduit when he heard the special knockety-knock that he and Zodiac had agreed upon. The former wolfman pushed up the hatch, and Zodiac crawled inside the tight tunnel. The magnet is in place, and it's actually working, Zodiac said, securing the panel above his head. Reg nodded and scampered away to instruct Bernard and Auston that they were now in play. He wondered why Zodiac had any doubt about whether his plan would work. Within minutes, Reg crawled up behind Auston and tapped him on the shoulder. It's up to you now. You and Mark now. Good luck. Auston acknowledged the strange new Reg and then rolled his eyes upwards as he turned into the GPS signal. Tuned into the GPS signal. Are you ready, Bernard? Kneeling on two cushions, Bernard hauled the ropes over broad shoulders and pulled them taut. Ready to navigate, Auston. Auston began to beep. Got one bar, now two, waiting. Reg twitched with agitation. Come on, Craig, if we don't change course soon, Captain Tinfoil will realize something's wrong. Auston didn't answer. Craig? The next 10 seconds felt like an eternity. Reg feared his plan was about to completely unravel. Waiting was all Auston would say. Feeling desperate, he slapped Auston on his back, jolting the human GPS system from the software glitch. 3 bars, 4 bars, 5 bars. Got a full signal, said Auston. Navigate, Reg cried. Bernard, pull to starboard, please, said Auston. Bernard looked up with a blank expression. Which way is that? Reg put his head in his hands. Right, Bernard. Pull on the left rope, Auston commanded. Bernard heaved on the left rope, and the rudder post slowly turned. Auston appeared to sense the directional change. That's great. Bernard, a little bit more. Now hold it. Perfect. Now please pull the right rope, Bernard, and straighten the rudder. Bernard obeyed. Auston turned to Reg. We are now on course for Mother's Landing. Reg sighed and smiled. Well done, Craig. Well done, Mark. I'll send Alan up as a communications runner. Reg turned and crept back along the conduit. Once he was out of earshot, Auston piped up. I really miss the old Reg. I can't do with these daft names. Yeah, you and me both. Like Mark, Craig, and Alan, I think this is all over. We should crack him over his head and maybe get the old Reg will reappear. Over several hours, the two friends continued to hijack their ship, safe in the knowledge that Captain Tinfoil had no idea. Up under the helmsman's shelter, Univon Steelet glanced at the compass and nodded his approval as the now manipulated compass. Captain Tinfoil appeared over Univon's shoulder at the compass and looked out to sea. They were holding a steady course, but still he had an uneasy feeling that something wasn't quite right. It had been 2 days since Reg had implemented, like a well-oiled machine. When Bernard tired, Derek and Barry stepped up and held the rope to a piece to keep the boat steady while Bernard had a few hours rest. Auston, however, was not afforded the luxury of a long break, so Derek would take instructions from him, allowing him an hour's sleep in his bunk every now and then. Any longer, they ran the risk of veering too far off course. Auston, exhausted, remained in the cabin, relaying navigational shifts through Stan. Up on deck, Captain Tinfoil paced up and down like a horizontal yo-yo, much to Univon's annoyance. He was completely unaware that they were traveling in the wrong direction, but still his instincts screamed at him that something was wrong. It was an itch that had forced him to check on team cogs and clocks on several occasions. He had gone down to their holding room and viewed the team through the food hatch. Knowing they were being watched, the team had ordered Colin to watch the helm. Peering through the lip of the hatch up on deck, complete with a picnic, the cook was comfortably at. I'm having a hard time here. Was comfortable at his post. Get my drink. Every time the captain disappeared, he would warn the team, and all but Bernard would scurry back to their cabin before the captain peered out through the hatch. Each time, everything appeared normal except for Stan's feet hanging from the rafters, and someone was always asleep in a bed. I figured the captain was unable to make out, but the numbers were correct. Under a collection of threatening dark clouds, a suspicious captain fingered his long beard and watched Univan steer the ship. Dario quacked. Master Univan, aye, Captain. When did you last have a break? Captain Tinfoil asked, watching the compass. 36 hours ago, Captain, but I'm not counting. Captain Tinfoil gasped. Even Dario gave Univan an uncomfortable stare. Good grief, why have you been out here for so long? Well, no one relieved me. Are you not tired? A look of hope flickered in Univan's eye. Oh, little could do with a toilet break. Before Captain Tinfoil could respond, a cry rang out from the crow's nest. Land ahoy! Captain Tinfoil patted Univan on the shoulder and passed him a bucket. That be good work, my boy. The captain scurried out of the shelter and onto the deck. The air was hazy and damp, and a cold breeze swung across his body. Through the mist of the new dawn, he smiled and looked out towards the lights of what he believed was Yellowstain port. Auston had been asleep for approximately 50 minutes when Derek nudged him. A flicker in his eye suggested that the GPS whiz kid was coming round. We'll land at Mother's Landing in around 2 hours at our current speed and course, blurted Auston as he woke from a dream that involved cycling shoes and a pair of rubber gloves. Stan relayed the message to the team. Well done, Reg, Barry said. Yeah, nice one, Reg, Colin agreed. Derek shook his head and smiled. I must admit I had my doubts, but you proved me wrong. Reg looked up and rolled his eyes. Reg, my name is Steve. A series of coughs ricocheted around the room. Reg sighed. Anyway, the hardest part of my plan is about to unfold. Oh, and what's that? Stan asked. Getting off the ship with our... Well, I wish I'd never asked. Whoa, sounds like it could get juicy. Reg paused for effect. Yes, it could. Our bikes are stored at the bow of the ship in a crate. Derek jumped off his bunk and stared at the pirate that was in Stan's bed, snoring like a jackhammer. Well, we may need this, then. He drew the pirate's sword from its sheath and then appeared to lose himself, thrusting and swinging the sword with one hand behind his back while he skipped forwards and backwards, shouting, Aha! Reg caught a glint of light dancing on the edge of the sword as the point of the blade almost sliced his nose off. I think the room might be a little too small for sword practice. Derek in his element grabbed the pirate's hat and flipped it on his head. I've always wanted to be a pirate. Really? I never would have guessed, Barry said with a wry smile. Nervous adrenaline seeped into Derek's bloodstream and his eyes lit up. Why couldn't the pirates play cards? Well, now's not a good time for a joke, Derek, Reg said with a total sincerity. The captain was on the deck. The morning haze began to lift as the sun hauled its way upwards. Dario quacked his appreciation from the shoulder of Captain Tinfoil, who was looking across the sea at what he thought was a LS Tangerine lazily cutting across the water some 400 meters away. Its appearance was no different from the LS Glitter. Around an hour later, the nagging itch Captain Tinfoil had felt for some time intensified. He rolled out his maps and checked them against the coastline, like a teenager who had been caught with his dad's mucky magazine. He gasped and horror filled his soul. Univan, he barked. Maybe not in the correct position. But the compass shows us heading northwest, said Univan, jumping upright, having almost fallen asleep. Dario, boy. Maybe heading towards Mother's Landing, Captain Tinfoil screamed. Startled, Dario flapped his wings and deposited a fistful of feathers onto the deck. Tinfoil darted across to the helm and examined the compass more closely. Uniban! Aye, Captain. Why, there be a magnet attached to the other side of the compass. Uniban shrugged helplessly. In a moment of uncomfortable rage, the captain ripped the offending magnet from its hiding place and crushed it under his foot. Uniban's eyes widened as the compass needle returned to its correct position. Tinfoil re-examined the now fully functional compass. They had indeed been sailing northeast and not northwest, 100 miles away from Mother's Landing. Tinfoil glared at Uniban. That'd be definitely Mother's Landing. And how do you suppose the magnet attached itself to the compass? Uniban gulped, his legs shaking. Captain Tinfoil suddenly became dark. He didn't need a bucket anymore. A dark splotch appeared around his groin. Who threatened me, but I didn't actually see him or her put that there, he blurted. Captain Tinfoil and Dario stared at the helpless cabin boy. Whack! Yeah, Dario, we have indeed been had, Tinfoil said. He turned back to Uniban, his mood now dark and controlled. I'd be dealing with you later. Get the men ready. I feel there be insurrection aboard coming. Captain Moore said that the LS Tangerine was overseeing the docking procedure at Yellowstain port. His big, warty hands rested on the deck rail, and his posture projected an unwelcoming air. Unlike his peers, Captain Walsh's appearance was more akin to a builder than a pirate. He wore trousers that failed to cover his permanently exposed rear end, and around the front they fought a losing battle against the heavy onslaught of his protruding belly. He had lost so many buttons he had resorted to using a thin rope to hold up his trousers. His hair and wayward beard were greasy and unkempt. Despite this, and for some strange reason, he believed he was God's gift to women. The scruffy, overweight sea dog attempted a toothless smile in the direction of clean lipsticks and shoes as they disembarked on a thin plank and stood in the quayside waving their bikes. Repulsed by the captain's leering, they turned away and ignored him as a small wooden deck crane at the bow of the ship dropped the crate of bikes onto the dockside. Captain Moore should have looked back out to sea with a look of mild concern, wondering where the yellow potato pie was. But after several seconds, he decided he didn't give a damn and resumed smiling at the girls who were tending to their bikes. Staring at her surroundings whilst disembarking, Starlet instantly realized that they were not where they were meant to be. She huddled the teams together. We have been duped. This isn't Mother's Landing. This is somewhere else. How rude of them to bring us somewhere else, Misty said, looking around the dingy port. Where exactly is somewhere else? Starlet surveyed the area. The smell of tobacco and the rundown buildings were typical of the decay of only one place. She shuddered. The stain of something evil was ever present, and the silence was intimidating. As if anything or anyone could appear out of the shadows and threaten them at any moment. Looking around, Starlet slowly whispered, "This is Yellowstain Port, once the home of the worst pirate who ever existed, Marco Yellowstain. We're approximately 100 miles off course." Misty stamped her foot and a curl of her hair tightened. "I'm going to write a strongly worded letter when we get back. This is cheating. How will we ever make it up that time? And who is Marco Yellowstain?" Starlet's peachy face wrinkled, as was a look she saved for the most undesirable of people. Marco Yellowstain had a penchant for cigarettes and grog, and he would resort to anything to acquire them. After an altercation involving a merchant ship many years ago, Marco had gone too far and attempted to relieve the captain of his life. He was sentenced to the other side of the ledge. However, after a few hundred years, he found a way to Earth and disappeared beneath the waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Mother Nature knows he's hiding in the depths, but she decided he can live in fear of never resurfacing again. There are rumors in an underwater city but nothing has ever been proven. The girls, for the most part, were full of anger, but, well, some were a little upset. Captain Watershed watched from his perch on the deck of his ship, and for a tiny millisecond, he felt pity towards the girls. But his empathy soon evaporated when he reminded himself of the ton of gold sitting in his hold for a job he considered, well, in his own words, to have been well done. He continued his lonely lusting over the ladies. He felt a sudden blow to his head. Stumbling backwards, he fell unconscious to the planks. His slow descent from standing tall to a mess of humble blubber sprawled out in an unfashionable pose on the deck was near perfect modern art. And before any of them could react, the scurvy sea dog milling around on deck felt the full force of a blunt object as it smashed into their heads with a sickening thud, knocking them to the wooden deck, dazed and confused. Modified arrows worth of blunt, square-tipped pieces of metal attached to the heads lay randomly around the deck. A door burst opening from underneath the forecastle deck, and like a line of lemmings, the pirates stormed out of the little opening, shouting, "Arr!" and "Shiver me timber!" while waving swords, axes, and hammers, and ran straight into a second barrage of arrows that arched from the trees and the shore. Within seconds, a pile of pirates' rubble completed the art exhibition. The beret-wearing critics of the nonsensical art world would award the work a gong for originality or something. Then again, they might have just drink expensive wine and talk shit. "What's going on?" Misty cried as the two horse-drawn carriages bolted out from the thick foliage of the dense forest that bordered the derelict port. They careered at speed into the open before coming to an abrupt halt. The two stagecoach drivers, perched high on their buggy benches, nodded at one another. They had an aura of authority about them, as well as nice matching blue uniforms and shiny polished shoes. They also sported little gleaming shields that were pinned onto their jackets. The doors of the coaches opened. "Can you please get into the carriages?" commanded a voice that was unsure whether or not the order was a little too harsh. 5 men with bows dropped from the trees. They too had the same air of authority and sparkling blue uniforms. Surrounding the carriages, they took up position and guarded the team. Stella smiled as she remembered the note from Mother Nature and looked up into friendly eyes of her. "Good to see you, Administrator Copperfeather." "Good to see you as well, but time is of the essence," Copperfeather replied, bouncing off his buggy bench and saluting awkwardly. "Hello, George," Starlet shouted across from the other driver. "Good day to you, Starlet," George replied, climbing down from the stagecoach. The two stagecoach drivers loaded the bikes onto the bike racks, fitted on the back of the carriages, and ushered the girls on board. "A gift from Mother Nature," said Starlet, climbing onto the coach. Copperfeather gasped and stared at Starlet. "A gift? Surely not." Starlet smiled. Copperfeather's bald head creased. She was beautiful, and Copperfeather was, well, just a copper. "Really," said Starlet with a smile, "and you just happen to have a bike rack fitted as well. You never know when they might be needed. And you just happen to be passing?" "Of course, me and George always pass this way, and around this time on this particular day, don't we, George?" George nodded and waved from his buggy bench. "Well, we are lucky girls today, are we not?" Copperfeather's face turned red, and he snapped the door shut behind Starlet. He turned to the 5 archers and gave them orders to secure the ship, tie up the crew, and book them in with Administrator Hothorns for re-education. Sorry. Where am I? The friendly faced lawman then climbed onto his own buggy, then grabbed the reins and ushered the four horses forwards. George followed, and they disappeared at speed down the narrow, dusty track and into the dense canopy of trees. Once we dock, we have to be quick, said Reg, replacing the small panel and without any thought to the direction of the grain of the wood in the ceiling of their room. Inside the conduit, teen cogs and clocks dressed in their cycling gear slithered one by one along the narrow space towards the vertical conduit that led up to the dock. Up on the deck and in disguise, Zodiac waited for them. He needed to unload the bikes and without being detected. Ooh, I can't wait to ride my bike. Damn, Derek said. Sorry, I just can't wait. Captain Tinfoil and his band of armed pirates waited outside Teen Cogs and Clocks' cabin. Tinfoil knew they had somehow deceived him and was taking no chances. With Dario, Patch, and Scar in tow, he burst into the room, waving his sword and shouting, "Arr!" Finding the room empty, except for the snoring pirate, Tinfoil prodded the slumbering sea dog with his sword. But the pirate didn't move. Tinfoil kicked the bunk and turned to Patch and Scar with a sinister look in his eye. "Find them and bring these scurvy dogs to me," he roared. Patch and Scar gulped and nodded before darting out of the room. Captain Tinfoil's eyes scanned the cabin. Dario hopped off his perch as the captain moved to the beds and felt the walls for loose panels. Nothing. He peered inside the tiny bathroom. Nothing. "How did ye get out?" he shouted, turning over a chest of drawers in frustration. The ship had almost docked, and he knew he would have the fury of Buck's Wad to deal with. He needed to know how they did it, how they had deceived him. He patted his hands across the walls. Nothing. Punching a wall, he screamed in agony, rolling his eyes upwards. Then he spotted it. A small square in the ceiling looked odd. The grain of the wood was lying in a different direction to the rest. Tinfoil smelled. "I've got ye now, ye salty dogs." Climbing up into the rafters, he pressed the tip of his sword gingerly against the panel. It moved to the side easily, and he peered inside. The conduit was empty. Tinfoil clambered up onto the small space, and Dario fluttered in behind. He cursed at himself, and he should have known about the conduits on his own ship. He inched his way along the horizontal corridor, smiling an evil grin. "Ye be mine now," he hissed, frothing at the mouth as Dario quacked. The Yellow Splinter pulled into the docks, and Buckswad made his way onto the poop deck and glanced across the harbor. His blood began to boil. "Morris!" he bellowed. Within seconds, the bulk of Morris' hammer burst through a door and settled up against him. "What is that ship doing here?" said Bucks, anger foaming from his mouth. Morris scratched his head and straightened his tie. "I don't know." Buckswad thumped the handrail. "Well, you had better hope Captain Tinfoil delays them." Morris remained silent, a deadly steely look glinted in his eye. Without any warning, he launched himself over the rail, landed on the deck, a very long way down, and rolled out of his fall, springing to his feet. "Where are you going?" Bucks thundered, amazed that Morris hadn't created a human-sized crater. "I'm going to insist that Captain Tinfoil delay them." Well, listen. As the yellow potato pie finished its docking maneuver, Zodiac, still in disguise, loaded the large crate, housing the bikes onto a small wooden crane. A rickety contraption consisting of wooden pulleys and a strong steel cable. Being the oldest person on the ledge, Zodiac had developed keen situational awareness skills, and they were now screaming at him. He scanned the deck, feeling the sudden urgency of the pirates. They appeared too busy to question what he was doing, but he sensed that his gig was about to burst at sea. Zodiac winched up the crate, pushed the long arm over the side of the ship, and lowered the bikes onto the dock. Satisfied they were secure, he crept along the deck to the hatch and lifted it up. The administrator was greeted by a face full of beard. face full of bread. Morning! Colin had reached the hatch first. He nodded at Zodiac and then nodded to Auston, who nodded to Bernard, who nodded to Barry, who nodded to Stan, who nodded to Derek, and finally Derek nodded to Reg, who nodded back at him. One by one, the team filtered onto the deck. That double one scurried for cover, which comprised several barrels stacked up by the edge of the deck. Sorry. At the end of the line, Reg waited patiently as Derek squeezed up the conduit towards the hole. A cold chill of terror then filled Reg's underpants. Someone was behind him. He craned his head and turned around to shudder as Captain Tinfoil's evil grin came into view. "Are you going somewhere?" Reg, wide-eyed with terror, cried, "Up!" And as Derek cleared the hole, Reg scampered up the conduit, narrowly dodging the point of Tinfoil's sword. "Hurry up!" he screamed. "We have company!" On hearing Reg's scream, Zodiac knew that time had struck zero and their gig was exposed. Captain Tinfoil bellowed from down below in the conduit. "Get them, lads! They be escaping!" Hatch and Scar burst onto the deck. "Hatch, let's get them!" "Get who?" "The prisoners, you idiot! Who'd you think?" "Oh, right." As Zodiac yanked Reg out of the hatch, the point of the captain's sword caught his lycra shorts, cutting a hole in the stretchable fabric. A deafening quack followed, and Dario exploded out of the small hatch seconds later. Grazing Reg's arm, the crazy duck spun in the air and turned to attack. Reg was in Dario's sights. Quack! The menacing duck dive-bombed towards his prey, priming his beak and pecking at Reg's head so violently that blood began to ooze from his wounds. For good measure, the bird slapped his exposed scalp with its webbed feet. Reg reached for the duck with one hand, the other raised and ready to strike. "Keep still, Reg," yelled Bernard. Steve, don't move." Reg obeyed, and he felt something small skim the top of his thin thatch. A small ball bearing struck Dario right between the eyes, and the bird fell unconscious onto the deck with a sickening thud. Reg looked back at Bernard and nodded as acknowledgement as the big lad reloaded his Diablo. "Come on," said Zodiac, and rushing Reg towards the bow of the ship and onto the forecastle deck, where the rest of Team Cogs and Clocks were waiting. "You'll be surrounded," said Captain Tinfoil as the scruffy captain hauled himself out of the hole onto the deck. Zodiac and the team looked from the captain to the quayside far below. Seeing the team were cornered, the pirates advanced on them, blocking their exit. "Well, it's been nice knowing you all," Colin said, pulling out a rock-hard stick of French bread. "Anyone fancy a last meal?" "A semicircle," Reg commanded. He then whispered into Derek's ear, "Do you still have that Colin's chef hat?" Derek's eyes spun in excitement. He nodded a sly smile and felt for the hat in one of his pockets in his cycling shirt and unfolded the white headpiece. Creeping up behind Colin, he placed the hat firmly on his head. Within seconds, the hat tightened around Colin's head and froth foamed at his mouth, and the calm, collected chef metamorphosed into an uncontrollably angry lunatic. Team Cogs and Clocks formed a semicircle while Bernard loaded his Diablo and raised it, poised to fire. Colin, the mad chef, his eyes an angry shade of red, swung his hard member of bread violently and screamed, "Get back or I will fucking kill you!" With his adrenaline pumping, Derek drew his sword, arched his back with his chin held high, and began thrusting the sword backwards and forwards, his other hand firmly behind his back and as he skipped from one foot to the other. Barry, Stan, Auston, and Reg raised their fists, and their pirates laughed. "Did you think you were ever going to get away?" said Tinfoil. "Well, yes," Stan sounded as nervous energy pumped his bravado. "Really? Well, you..." Captain Tinfoil stopped, spotting his pet duck sprawled across the deck. He screamed in terror, "Dario!" He raced towards the stricken bird, his eyes burned with an anger that could have melted an iceberg. Whoever did this, he whispered with evil intent, is in real trouble. Tinfoil picked up Dario and placed him on a crate, resting his head on a soft rolled up rag. Pairs, he yelled. Advance! All right, that's it for this chapter. Chapter 18, cleared for take off his neck. And that one's, let's see, about as long, so we won't have time today to read that. Let me mark my place so I don't get lost. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. I look forward to seeing you on our next one, which will be, today is Friday. So the next one will be Tuesday. That'll be chapter 18, and then the final chapter will be on Friday. And then we are done with the Legend of Creation. The next one we'll be doing, the next book will be the third book from Legend of Creation. Oh, that's Steve's. Next one will be from the third book of Sheriff in a Small Town, book 3, A New Sheriff. So I look forward to bringing that to you. I hope you will be here next Tuesday for the first chapter in that, where we read the entire book. We're only reading a few chapters in Legend of Creation. You want to know the rest, go on Amazon, get the book. It is a lot of fun. It's one of my favorites. And I've got a few books, so I will see you on the next reading. So see you Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning. Be good. Be good to yourself.